Hey everyone, welcome back to Apollo Art Analysis. In today's episode, we're going to be studying a piece by the 3D artist known as Hayden Clay. And today we are going to be discussing the Dreamcore aesthetic. We're also going to talk about the sterile and sheltered nature of the suburbs. So let's just jump right into it. So at first sight, you're likely going to be wondering what exactly is going on here, right? The space of this composition really revolves around this central spiral going down into a ever darker and darker void there. Of course, this creates a sense of visual rhythm, right? The placement of each individual house, one after the other, it of course draws the eye downward and downward into that spiral. This of course creates a sense of rhythm and even a slight bit of energy within the composition at hand. Of course, it also directs the eye as well. Another thing I noticed is the use of color here, right? Of course, green is going to be the base. That is that classic, suburban lawn here. We certainly see that within this composition. But upon that, we have blue, we have yellow, we have green, and pink as well. All of which kind of contrasts against that green, right? We have, of course, that light green and that light blue. Those are going to be much closer to the analogous color scheme of the color green. But something like, yellow or something like red, that kind of pinkish tone is going to be contrasting, going to stand out a lot more on the composition at hand. And I wanted to ask you guys, how do y'all feel when you view this composition? Of course, whenever you're looking at a work like this, you're going to wonder what exactly is going on here. This is entitled cul-de-sac, and cul-de-sac is a French term for something which only has one opening. Typically it's used to describe suburban streets where it comes to a dead end and you have a bunch of houses kind of in a circular area here. I think we certainly see that here. Of course, you had that circular aspect, that central nature of the spiral. There's no doubt about that. But to talk about the suburbs, there's a lot of symbolism you could discuss, right? The suburbs were created as a way to escape the extremely crowded nature of the large cities, right? So they are created far out of the city centers, and there's a lot of space within the suburbs as well. That, of course, points to a sense of individualism, where you can kind of be sheltered off, you can kind of separate yourself from others as well. Of course, that points to the American dream as well, especially in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. The suburbs were typically associated with the American dream and kind of living with your own autonomy. We certainly see that within this composition, right? Like I said, the placement of each individual house, one after the other, gives a lot of space within the work at hand, of course creates that pace and that rhythm as well, but that certainly points to the symbolism of the suburbs. I think there's no doubt about that. When I was talking to the original artist Hayden Clay, he was discussing the nature of this series of the suburbs. I have some additional works in here. I'm going to bring those in just one second, but he was telling me that he was trying to deal with the nature of the suburb in a surreal context. I think we certainly see that here. This, of course, is a very surreal work. Surreal meaning greater than real or even impossible in that aspect as well. You're not going to see something like this in real life because it is impossible. It is reminiscent of a dream, and we're even going to discuss a little bit more about the Dreamcore aesthetic here in a second. But like I said, I have some additional works from the original artist Hayden Clay. I want to bring this in real quick and see what we can learn here. Alright, so I got two additional works, both from Hayden Clay's Suburbs series, to compare to the original work today, of course also belonging to that same series of the suburbs. On the right side, you see what is also reminiscent of the same color of houses, right? Each one spaced one after the other. There's a sense of monotony. There's a sense of, cookie cutter nature, or the kind of industrial mass production of these houses one after another. Great sense of visual rhythm, great sense of, say, two-point perspective as well, going endlessly off into the distance. It is also very, clean. It is very sterile in that aspect as well, even unsettling to that point. I think that's incredibly important. We compare that to the work on the left. You have, of course, the suburban lawn. But there is this strange void that it drops down into. The lawnmower is creating this very deep cut within the grass. Also very strange, also very bright, colorful, but at the same time it is so surreal or so clean that it is even to the point of being unsettling. So I just want to bring in two additional works here to compare to the original work Cul-de-sac today. Once again, this is from Hayden Clay's series known as The Suburbs. And briefly, I did want to mention something that I noticed. A few days ago, I studied a work by emptyspaces.png in Destinasia, a Dreamcore aesthetic work, no doubt. I absolutely love this piece as a portal into the world of the suburbs. But what I notice is, these houses within there, they are quite reminiscent of these houses. The actual form, however, the actual assets are not quite the same, but the color combination are the exact same, right? You have pink, green, yellow, blue. Pink, green, yellow, and blue. So perhaps, there is some inspiration going on in one of these two works, or perhaps there is some references or some of the same assets. But like I said, these houses aren't the exact same, but it is rather strange, and the colors are the exact same. So I just wanted to mention that briefly. This, of course, is Hayden Clay's work, and the work on the right is by Destinasia and emptyspaces.png. All right, so those were two sets of insights that I discovered, of course, relating to Hayden Clay's Suburbs series. But of course, when we talk about the suburbs, we discussed a little bit about that sense of individualism, of being sheltered and kind of closing yourself off from one another. But of course, suburbs in and of themselves are quite sheltered. They're quite sterile. Any kind of danger is kind of smothered and protected away from the child, especially as they grow up in the suburbs. Of course, any type of risk is also averted as well. There's so many different things you could say about that. But the nature of the suburbs could shelter you to the point where you're kind of being, covered from the true dangers of the true aspect of life. I think that's quite important as well. Of course, that creates a sense of shock whenever you enter adulthood. Of course, when you turn 18 in America, if you live in the suburbs, adulthood can seem very shocking. We don't have any kind of, rite of passage into adulthood. The only thing that we can kind of point to is, of course, going off to college or graduating from high school. So adulthood comes very quickly, and we know from a lot of different psychology and a lot of different researchers that children are growing up a lot later nowadays. They're doing things that are associated with adulthood a lot later as well. So, of course, there's so many aspects of that could point to the reason why the Dreamcore aesthetic is so popular nowadays. Of course, adulthood is seen as a sudden shock, and there's this sense of nostalgia or longing for the past that a lot of people have. They feel like they, breeze through their childhood, or they even, long to go back to those childhood days, or that sense where they don't have any responsibility or they don't have to deal with what we call quote unquote adulting. But of course, the Dreamcore aesthetic, I think that captures it so well. It shows that, those times live now only in imaginative memoriam. You cannot go back, but you can kind of recapture some of those aspects or feel that deep sense of nostalgia in a lot of these Dreamcore aspects and these Dreamcore displays. So, of course, the work before us captures that so well as well. Of course, giving it an unsettling nature, the Dreamcore aesthetic often does that. But this is a very symbolic piece. I really hope you'll enjoy it today. Of course, that central spiral, the sterile and the sheltered nature of the suburbs, the individualism that comes inherently with the nature of suburbia, all are very important when we're talking about this work. And once again, the original artist was trying to show the suburbs in a surreal light, and I think he certainly did that. He achieved that so well within this composition. The work before us was created in the 3D art program known as Houdini. Houdini is, not used by a lot of different artists. It's much more professional. So, of course, a minority of artists are going to be using Houdini to create their 3D renders. Most people use, Cinema 4D or Blender, but the original artists here used Houdini. I'm sure there's a lot of different aspects and advantages that come with, but like I said, I really hope you'll enjoy it. Today, we talked about so many different things. Once again, mentioned the sterility and the sheltered nature of the suburbs. We talked about the, sudden shock of adulthood as you grow up. We also talked about the sense of visual rhythm within this work and the surreal nature, the surreal spirit of that as well. Like I said, I really hope you'll enjoy it today. If y'all did, go check out the original artist, Hayden Clay, doing some amazing stuff in the world of the digital render. My name's Apollo. This was Apollo Art Analysis, and I'll see y'all on the next episode. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to support our work directly, please check out our Apollo community tokens. Apollo Art Exchange is an ecosystem of art appreciation which elevates artists each and every day. Thanks for listening.